button. It's recording good enough. Yeah, so training hip extension. It's been a sort of I met with Dennis Welch, who's another endurance coach, chatted with him back in late June this year. And then it's something that I've dabbled in a little bit, but he was sort of showing me videos, and we did the tire dragging exercise and stuff, and we were just talking about how important hip extension is, and I got into watching these different videos and stuff, and was like, oh man, like, I don't know, there's just so much, basically you never want to be in front of the body when running. You want to land underneath center of mass as much as possible, but then hip extension, it seemed like the better and better people got, the bigger their hip extension was, or more force they were able to generate. So yeah, in short, I think hip extension, a basic definition of it, hip flexion, if this is the hip flexion is any time that hip comes up in the front of the body. Hip extension, time it goes behind the body there, a very broad definition of it. Yeah, in terms of running and stuff, you see this in the running gait a lot, where if this is the lower body, this is the upper body, you see an anterior pelvic tilt. That's basically some combination of tight hip flexors or tight hamstrings or lack of a glute. Is usually the combo there. And then that anterior pelvic tilt, where they're leaning forward slightly, basically completely zaps a person's ability to get and achieve hip extension. And so they're often in what I call sort of an analysis of the dreaded letter K position, where their front's doing this, their lower end is doing this, and fully in hip flexion with their knee fully extended. And then you could draw a line up their back, and that would make the letter K. So that's like the worst position to be in, but very, very, very common. So that's my intro rant. So,
I imagine it increases the shearing forces too when they're impact, they're landing,
yeah,
because they're upper forward and they're prodding down instead of gliding over the floor. They're now impacting the floor.
Yep.
Yeah.
100%. So from a strength training perspective and stuff like that, so what would, I don't know, how would you program it? Like, what type of exercises, in your opinion? I'm curious to know that. What exercises, in your opinion, are most effective for training hip extension? And then I'll chat with you sort of what I found sort of through trial and error to be the most effective for translating that into what I'm interested on my end is basically like, I have less interest if you can deadlift 600 pounds and your glutes work for you in the deadlift position at 600 pounds. If you can't get your glutes to fire, like, you could have all the strength in the world in your glutes, but if you cannot get them to fire dynamically, from a pure running mechanics standpoint, there's little point in having done those super heavy deadlifts if you can't then translate that into
and I would want to train the posture of the runner as well, which is to be vertical. So outside of powerlifting, obviously they're probably not going to have to worry about a maximum low bar back squat. It would put them in a forward tilt position and a bad position. They would benefit. If they're going to squat, they would benefit better from a front squat variation, where the idea is to keep the torso as vertical as possible and hip extend the hole and come to the top. But other patterns would be beneficial as well, especially since running is predominantly split stance, such as a split deadlift. Getting stronger within staggered stance position. So a split stance deadlift. I suck at that thing.
Yeah.
Split stance deadlift is basically putting one foot behind the other by about 6 or 7 inches. So the majority done by the front foot, and you're really focusing on hip extension and getting a tall vertical position. And then both feet would be in contact with the floor, but let's say your toe is spiked behind you, as if you're about to start a sprint, but not as excessive, but you're still vertical. So you're putting a deadlift with a slightly split stance. That would be beneficial. As far as you talked about using hip extension to pull the body forward, just practical warm-up and glute firing exercises would be a 90-90 hip and heel lift, where you have someone lay on their back on the floor, knees bent to 90 degrees, and heels on a bench, and having them lift themselves up by either both legs, or if they progress from that to 2 legs. So they're working on hip extension by pulling through the heel or the flat foot, which is something you want as they're running. I'm
having difficulty picturing it. Can you go through it slowly again? Or
sure.
show me with fingers or hands or something.
So basically they're making an L shape, right? So their back is flat on the floor this way. Their knees are bent 90, and then they have their heels on the couch or on the bench, and they're lifting themselves up from their heel.
Oh, weird.
So
Okay, got it.
as a pivot point to lift their hips off the floor.
Okay.
It's in physical therapy a lot for people who have hamstring, glute, and hip issues. So there's a slight bend of the knee already that's the 90-degree angle of the hip and 90-degree of the knees, and they're lifting themselves up into hip extension.
And what's that thing called?
It's a 90-90 heel and hip lift. So you're pressing through the heels to lift the hips off the floor.
Okay. I'm writing, taking notes on our conversation.
Take notes. Yeah.
So no, you were saying we mentioned what's it called? We mentioned the front rack squat, which I agree with you there. Front rack squat, then you would do a staggered stance RDL. Staggered stance RDL. Alex showed me those a while back, and I was like, "What the heck are these?" And then
you're already running a staggered stance, so basically you would take your run stride, back foot spiked in the toe, and work on either a staggered stance deadlift or a staggered stance RDL.
Okay. Cool. And then it was called a 90-90-10. Was that last thing, right?
Yeah, 90-90 hip lift.
A 90-90 hip lift. Okay, got it.
Yeah, that's all you're lifting off the floor is your hips, and you're pushing down on the bench through your heels.
Okay.
The foot's vertical, the knees are 90, the hips are 90, and you're just pressing down. And the beginning is pushing from both legs. The progression would be to advance to one leg.
Okay. So both legs at first, and then you eventually migrate to a single leg.
And advance that as well to putting the foot flat on the wall in an almost vertical position. You're laying more flat because that would stimulate running. If you were to stagger your stance on the wall and lift yourself up off the floor that way, that is hip extension from, you're laying down, but the same position you'd be running from.
Interesting. I'm like, as we talk about this, I'm all sorts of curious for self-experimentation. Because there was a test that I was doing. I'll see if I could demo it anywhere. I'll try to awkwardly demo it here. I'm trying to see if you can sort of see me here or whatever. So as I'm trying to demo this or whatever, the test or whatever basically was and my hip flexor external rotators are probably too tight to do this as it is, but you'd put your leg up like this or whatever it is on the bench, and then you'd try to lift up your heel using the contraction of your glute. Right. So I guess it's a similar thing. I completely failed that, and I cannot, when my hip is in external rotation, I cannot for the life of me get my glute to fire. But that might just be another issue.
I believe it's called hip car, where they work on rotating the hip all the way around and back. You can do it from a seated position on the floor as well. So instead of going on the table, which is your end range, go a little lower with your mobility, sit on the floor and work on lifting your leg up and circling around from side to side.
Okay, that makes sense.
So that's a regression for that movement.
Okay. Lower, go to floor. Huh. Okay. So those are kind of the looking at sort of strength movements and stuff like that. That's kind of what you'd recommend then for teaching hip extension relevant to the running motion.
Yeah, that and a step up to a knee raise. So that's the propulsion you're looking for. So if you had a bench or box anywhere between 12 to 18 inches, about 90 degrees, stepping forward on the bench and raising the opposite knee to the same level, about 90 degrees, and balancing that position. So step up to balance.
Okay.
So that's another issue. You mentioned this before. We were reviewing a gait analysis video where someone's hip was significantly dropping.
Yeah.
As they fatigue, their hip stability went. So doing this would be more of an endurance move. Step up the balance. You can load the movement, and you can work on how long you hold that balanced position for hip stability.
Okay, right, and that's going to get the abductors, the glute medius, and all that firing as well.
We wouldn't want to just train the hip extension. We want to train hip extension as well as hip stability during bipedal.
No, that makes good sense. Okay. Yeah, and that so I was just, because I go crazy here with self-experimentation as I learned this stuff. This morning, I was doing stair repeats over here in San Diego, and there's about a place called Torrey Pines Glider Port that's about 300 feet of just really uneven stairs of differential lengths. So some are 18 inches, some are 24-inch stairs. But basically, I can tell that I've not yet mastered hip extension yet in the dynamic movement there. not that like, and even as people should understand that even as you master this, when you get to running, I was told by Richard Diaz once, who's a gait analyst, like you shouldn't 100% feel it in the quads and you shouldn't 100% feel it in the glutes. The load should be kind of shared between, because all these muscles are firing in some amount while going up a climb. But the issue is, you know, if you're going up a set of stairs or whatever, and you've got a huge anterior tilt and you're loading similar to how if you would do a step up incorrectly, putting a lot of weight in that forward foot and stepping up through that forward foot or whatever, that's a big quad stability there. There's a lot of quad stability going on. And so I had that whenever I'd lose focus on the stairs, as I started to do a little bit of a lean, started to put a lot of weight in my front of my foot, versus what I was trying to focus on rather was, and tell me if this is like correct or not in terms of a step up, was generating energy sort of on the down and back. So if this is a step or whatever it is, not putting my weight when I step forward, rather like really trying to generate sort of enough down and back force through my glute that my hip flexion occurs really as a result of strong hip extension. Does that make sense?
They're reciprocal sides, so that would be ideal to, you know, flex from the right as you're extending from the left. And was the idea actually behind the box squat that's commonly used in geared powerlifting or even the West Side system was they were sitting so far back and then stopping momentum entirely. And if a box squat's done correctly, they don't rock forward for the same reason you didn't want to. You didn't want to lean forward because then you were shifting the emphasis to the front of the foot, the quad. So the box squat, they remain absolutely vertical, and they work to hip extend themselves off the box while staying vertical.
Okay.
So it's that same theory, and that's what you want to do is you're teaching your hamstrings and glutes to fire you into hip extension without having to lean forward first and creating momentum.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's so while you're stepping up or while you're climbing, that should be your thought. Am I pulling or am I pushing? So if you're leaning forward, you're pushing from the quad. Now it's going to be involved to some degree if the knee flexes, obviously. Yep. But the idea should be to pull yourself up like a cyclist will pull themselves forward as opposed to push the pedal down.
Right. Yeah, like a good cyclist will know to pull the pedal rather than to push the pedal. Yeah.
Yes.
Which is why I was never a good cyclist. But no, okay, that makes sense.
I heard Alex had a hard time breaking on the bike, so.
Dude, yeah, man. Is it, out of curiosity then, is the glute, am I cueing myself in the incorrect way then if I'm thinking just in the context of a step up or walking upstairs or running upstairs?
Because the glute
if I'm thinking down, pushing down and back, that's the incorrect way of cueing?
The glute is not going to be the glute is a strong hip extensor, but it's a strong hip extensor when the legs are almost together, like when you're at the top end of hip extension. So if you're stepping up a high step that's 12 to 18 inches, what's got to fire first is the hamstring and then the glute. So if you're trying to push from the glute and you're in a high flex position, it's not going to be able to pull you up. The hamstring has to go first. So the lower you are in the squat, the more the hamstring fires. The higher you get, the more the glutes finish. So you have to think of where you are in that extension. So if you're taking a high step, it has to be hamstring first to glute. Yeah. Or if it's a small step, you can go glute.
Okay, that makes sense.
Like once you get on the 6-inch step, you're gonna have to start pulling with the hamstring first. Roughly.
Yeah. Let me see real quick. I'm just bouncing around on YouTube for the sake of this. Or I'm gonna go to images. And I'm just doing running upstairs. Just a side video here, or a side shot of someone running upstairs. Just so I can talk about this for a moment with you. And then I'm gonna go here. I'm gonna go to share screen. And okay. So in the screen share here, you should be able to see basically. So what you're saying. So she's got a little bit of anterior tilt going on here. Can you see it, Trevor?
Yep.
So she's got a little bit of an anterior tilt, so this isn't like super perfect. We were talking about maintaining more of an upright posture when going upstairs. I don't know. I mean, in theory, they talk a lot about in running mechanics of having a slight forward lean when going up hills. But that forward lean, you definitely want it to come from you want to be able to draw a straight line, and you want it to be able to come from ankles to head. There's definitely a slight anterior pelvic tilt that she's got going on. Anyways, I'm not trying to analyze that. What I'm trying to say here is rather than, because the big the big things that I get from like my clients or, you know, the people that I try and work with or whatever is fatigue in the hip flexor right here. Whenever they're doing stairs or hill climbing, whatever it is, people fatigue all day long in the quads and the hip flexors. And then the calves are the main spots where people fatigue in the uphill. And so that again is like that idea of the more you push, if you push off into the next step, I would say that's very, in some contexts, if you don't know how to push, you're potentially overusing your calf muscle. You could call pulling up the knee. That is a pull motion that would activate the hip flexor. So how do we do this? How do we do this pull? I know you don't have the little fancy jolly thing, so just tell me where to circle. But how do we get the hamstring to, and so that's what you're talking there with the hamstring pull is sort of the basis of what they talk about a ton in pose running, where she's just the Vanessa, Valerie is her name. She's a big pose running coach. Talks about hamstring pull all day long. But is it in this phase right here that you're doing the hamstring pull, or further along?
All the way through. That's where the step up to balance will teach you, because if you're pulling all the way through, the opposite hip's going to come automatically up from the reciprocal motion.
Okay, so in this instance,
yes.
Am I circling the correct hamstring here?
Yes.
No. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's the correct hamstring. There is going to be some hip flexion inside because you have to raise the hip to reach the next step. But ideally, she should be propelling herself up by pulling from the hamstrings more so than leaning forward, stepping, and pressing down. So if you, it's a step up, not a press down. So you want to pull yourself up with each stride.
Okay. Step
almost bounding. Sprinters bound. They use their hamstrings and they bound and basically hop and pull to teach that hip extension. Bounding is a plyometric hip extension drill that a lot of sprinters and jumpers use. And if you're going to be climbing uphill, it's probably a skill that you would transfer to climbing stairs or climbing uphill. Would be almost bound, bringing off the hamstring to come up. Okay,
that makes sense. Okay, so it's still a pull, and then the glute gets to fire basically as it sort of comes through here.
The closer the knee gets to full extension, the more the glute will fire, and that's what's going to propel the hips forward even more. So the hamstring initiates the pull to start, and then the glute kind of finishes the propulsion forwards.
Okay, so hamstring initiates, then the glute.
So you can think in the process of hamstring to glute, hamstring to glute, hamstring to glute, pulling through.
Okay. Ham to glute. Okay. Cool. No, that makes sense then. Okay. Because I was trying to teach this, so now I'll review with you real quick kind of the exercises that I was having folks do and the ones that I've been like, oh, these are excellent. And curious to get your opinion on them. Then basically is the like a single leg kickback or a donkey kick.
Right.
I was liking that a lot because it teaches very similar to how you're doing hip extension running. So a little bit of stability there. With you got to balance on one leg while you do a resistance band around one leg. And so you kick back with the leg that's on around the resistance band, ideally with an ankle weight strap or whatever. And just doing those and focusing on kicking back and getting the heel to touch the ground lightly, and then back up and out. And just focusing on that, what I was getting for feedback from people, and sort of having done it myself, we were getting the glute in a very similar to motion to running. Some people were feeling it a little bit more in the hamstring than the glute. Is that sort of what you were talking about there with the step up thing? And it's okay, because I was doing it under the context in my mind of like, this is a really glute dominant thing and you want the glute to go down and back, but you still should like initiate that.
They work together. They're both, and it depends upon how high the hip comes first. The lower the hips, the more the glute's going to be involved. The higher the hip goes, the more the hamstring has to initiate the pull to start hip extension.
Okay. So
it depends upon how far into flexion or extension the knee and the hip is.
Okay, that makes sense. So the so the foot goes back or whatever, it drives back, the heel touches, and then in this next moment, basically the hamstring is now pulling, and then the glute goes. Or sorry, when we're going in extension originally, it's the. All right, so let's start with the knee up. The knee is up in front of the runner. and then they're kicking back. That kickback motion is originally done. That's originally glute right off the bat there, correct?
If they're
sort of kick.
Let's say they were prone on all fours. If you were on all fours on the floor and you were to lift your leg up, that would be predominantly glute. But if you're vertical and the weight then goes in front of you, the axis of weight goes in front of you, and your knee is 90 degrees at that point, then it's going to come from the hamstring first to pull back and then finish with glute. So if you
got it.
Motion, then you predominantly train the glute. But if you're thinking of synergists, since they work together, it's probably not ideal to focus on just glute or just hamstring, but to focus on using them in unison as you would as you run.
Got it.
Especially running trails, which are going to have varying terrain up and down.
Okay. No, that makes sense.
I always tell people, when you're dealing with athletics, think in terms of muscle integration, not isolation.
Okay.
Especially when you're dealing with people of different structures. Like, you're tall and lanky and I'm short and stubby.
Right.
We would have different running mechanics, but ultimately we're trying to achieve the same thing, which is movement efficiency.
Right, 100%. No, that makes sense. Integration, not isolation. I like that. No, that makes sense, and that sort of ties together. So I went and saw a local analyst here in San Diego, and she looked at my stride or whatever and was like, "Oh, you're skipping like the final phase of extension." And then we talked about it a bit and stuff, and through like way too heavy focus in the last year, basically on cadence, I was like clipping my step and not letting my foot go into full extension because I was too preoccupied to stay up with cadence. And then so I've been working on that and stuff, and working on like the single leg kickbacks and a lot of tire dragging, which I'll talk about in a second.
It was just about to say, we talked about can be achieved probably better by walking a sled.
Yeah.
So you're talking about walking a tire, but walking a sled where you can vary the load. The tire is one load and it's a drag. The sled, you can start with a 25-pound plate, progress with 35-pound plate, 45-pound plate. So a dragging sled,
you can stack things on that tire.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. People like screw in a post and put plates in there, and that works. But marching the sled in your cadence and mechanics is probably better because there isn't really much of an eccentric load. It's strictly concentric. So if you're hills and you're running trails, it's predominantly concentric contraction after concentric contraction. That will help you strengthen and condition the concentric. If you're lifting weight, it's going to proceed with an eccentric contraction, but the running may not.
Okay. That makes sense. So like it becomes even a better exercise than, or the tire pulling or sled pulling becomes even a better exercise because it's explicitly very, very, very similar to the running motion.
Very similar
versus like a deadlift. You have to get through that eccentric first before you get to the.
You can work on the mechanics. So because you analyze gait and you analyze someone's movement, you can watch how they march or walk the sled and maybe see what they're not doing. Like you mentioned, you weren't finishing hip extension.
Okay.
If she watched the tire, she'd probably notice you weren't finishing hip extension. So it's going to expose a link in that integration chain right away.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, what I've really liked with the tire drag as well has been it's been that, and then it's been an instant like, I mean, you go with a 40 or a 50-pound tire or something like that, or a decently heavy sled, you see pretty instantaneously. Like deficiency in someone's core or anything like that. And you can see them instantly. If they don't have a strong core, they instantly sort of collapse over at the midline. So it's been, the tire drag is interesting because exactly like you're saying, you can see the mechanics and stuff.
And if you're working with someone from a feedback scale, you can ask them what they feel fatiguing first. And that's probably the area I would prioritize with accessory movements to build.
Okay.
So we talk with somebody who feels hamstrings fatigue at first, that might be an indicator that their hamstrings need more attention than their glutes. If someone's glute fatiguing first, that would be an indicator they may need more glute work than hamstring work.
Okay. I've had a lot of difficulty with a lot of people just coming over from, if I look at them at first and I say, okay, here's your typical anterior pelvic tilt or whatever that we see. Oh, what do you do for work? Oh, I'm at a desk 8 to 10 hours a day or whatever it is, and this is my work. I've had a lot of issues with those people, even when they do like a single leg glute bridge or anything like that. They're like, oh yeah, it's quads and lower back. What are you talking about? And I'm like, and then it's difficult with those individuals that they probably make up the bulk majority of folks who I work with. So it's difficult to get those individuals then when even they do a tire drag, like get them in a proper form as much as possible at first to kind of get them feeling the glute, and then even if they feel the glute, I found the glutes pretty resistant to fatigue relative to like the hamstring or a calf or something like that. Like have you found the same thing? Like I haven't had anyone big. I've had people like, oh, my glutes really sore, but no one in my experience has yet to say like, oh yeah, my glutes like totally fried. It's always another muscle first.
I was about to say they're most likely using synergists first. So
okay,
it used to be called synergistic dominance back in the way, and a secondary muscle that helps assist the motion, like for instance, your hamstrings and your glutes both hip extend. Okay. But if you have initiating your glutes during the movement, there's a lot of theory whether it's glute amnesia or just a firing problem or some type of neural disruption. But whatever it may be, the synergist may take over, and that's why I feel the glutes fatiguing because they're not working as hard as they should or they could be during the movement. And that's where these glute activation drills or band walks and stuff like that come into play. Is trying to teach them how to fire them within that pattern so they can use more muscles. That's our whole goal, is to use as many muscles as possible to be efficient.
Right. No, that makes sense. That makes good sense. Okay. Yeah, so that makes sense. This is sort of in watching them and just summarizing real quick, and watching them with a band walk, with a sled pull or whatever, and you have them. I would instruct them first originally to like, for me, it's like, okay, watch them pull first, and if they're pulling all from the waist and they're bent over or whatever, and they're like, oh, my quads, all my calves, I'm going to try to ask them to try and stand more upright. I've had some success, and you give me your opinion on this. I've had some success with telling them to dark that direction, but telling them basically to walk like this, where they put their arms out in front of themselves as if
hollowing out their body, going into almost a posterior tilt, so they're forced to contract.
100%. So
if they live in anterior tilt, that's probably the best thing for them, is to exercise in a slight posterior tilt to understand balancing out the pelvis, creating structural balance. And, because our posture tends to be behavioral based. So if you are 8 to 10 hours a day and you're sitting there, chances are you probably have some protracted internally rotated shoulders. You might have an anterior tilt, hamstring, short hip flexors, because you spend the majority of your day that way. So that would be the exact thing I would want to do too, is take them into the opposite posture so they learn what it feels like, especially for some load, so they can get stronger where they need to.
Yeah, opposite posture. Okay, yeah, and so that was the kind of one thing that I'll have them drag like that basically then, and then it's they stay a lot more upright and parallel and everything like that. And then it's kind of a question there, as you were saying, of like, okay, hey, what fatigues first? And then, like you're saying, that's sort of your answer as to which of those muscles one should target first in terms of, oh, my, hamstrings burnt out or whatever, or they're really sore. Okay, well, we should probably stretch and work on this. Okay, makes sense. Makes good sense. Man, no, that's good stuff so far. I'm trying to think. So yeah, so I would say like the stuff that I've been working on with people was the single leg kickbacks. I'd had a lot of good feedback with that. The tire drags, I've had good feedback with that. Hip thrusts and stuff like that, I've enjoyed for like the isolation of it and everything like that. But what's your opinion of like hip thrusts or single leg hip thrusts versus like the staggered stance RDL?
I like using body weight hip thrusts or low load banded hip thrusts just as activation or warm up. I think the obsession with the heavy hip thrust is a little overrated because people's form tends to break down and they tend to back extend the weight, which is the opposite if you want. They go into that anterior tilt to finish. I prefer using things like band pull throughs or cable pull throughs, especially as you mentioned, when you have people who are living in anterior tilt, you can have them do the pull through in a posterior tilt and really feel how their hamstrings, glutes, hip extend. And there's no load on the spine because the weight's it's not actually loaded. The weight's coming from underneath them.
Okay. Yeah. So cable pull through.
Yeah. It's very easy to teach. No one has to. So the transfer is much quicker, and you have them finish in that posterior tilt, which helps them. And then you can even have them hold it isometrically so they can really get some proprioception feel where they should be. So they finish the band.
That makes sense.
Isometrically for 30 seconds, 45 seconds, and then they will feel their glutes burning.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, and I've had a lot of that. I was going to say that was the exercise that slipped my mind when I put a person through like a glute warm up or something like that. It'll be some of that. I precisely agree with you. 1 through self experimentation and 2 through having assigned it to people, the heavy hip thrusts, completely agree. Like when I personally at least get to the higher end, I start overcompensating with my low back there.
Yes.
Cable pull throughs, you don't do that. That makes sense. Opinions on like reverse hypers or anything like that, or any of those is like kind of tricky.
I have never found doing them weighted
Okay.
or enhance my powerlifting,
Yeah.
but I like doing them body weight and for very high reps for conditioning of my posterior chin.
Okay.
A couple I belong to have them, and sometimes I'll just hop on there and knock out 50, 60, 70 reps, just body weight. And it's great for runners because they can even stride. You know, they lift up, hip extend, and then alternate their stride a little bit and work on that because their handles in front will allow them to posteriorly tilt, hold that position, and just go stride, almost like a paddleboard for swimmers. You know, they hold the paddle, just work their kick. You could very likely have a runner hold the handles in front, posterior pelvic tilt, and just work on his stride in that position.
On a treadmill or on a
reverse hyper.
Okay, yeah. So what are they? So they're doing the reverse hyper just on a bench or something like that, or?
Most powerlifting gyms have platforms where the actual reverse hyper platform. Some of the bigger gyms have them.
Okay.
But you can do it over a bench or a ball. Put a ball over a bench and hold yourself up, and then raise, and then just slowly, like your run cadence, alternating legs while holding them in the air.
Okay, got it. Okay, and then
but if you had to have an accessory to go to or you were traveling, it's a variation.
Okay, and then you could do whatever it is, 50 reps of those alternating legs, and then hop off, go into your run instantly, see how that felt, pattern that basically, and then go back into that. Okay.
Yeah, the reverse type, like the hip thrust, when you have the weighted platform, people tend to swing the weight, form breakdown, just try and move it. And to me, it's drilling with my lifters. There's an intent to the exercise. Focus on the exercise, not necessarily the load, unless it's testing your maximum back squat, maximum bench, maximum deadlift. If it's not testing, focus on the intent and build with it.
Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. No, that makes good sense. So then we have I like the idea too of the step up to the knee raise as well, and sort of learning to use the hamstring and the glute through that. I think that's really especially relevant to people who I'm trying to teach to use those muscles properly on stairs and stuff.
101, you can even accommodating resistance to that too. So they don't have to have dumbbells or barbells, which might pitch them forward or they might swing.
Mm-hmm.
You can stand behind someone with a very light resistance band, the same way you do the sled. Put the resistance band on their waist, have them focus on their posture, and have them pull themselves up to the bench and balance.
Right.
A light resistance band will teach them to pull forward as opposed to press down.
No, that makes sense. I'm checking the time on the thing real quick. Like I said, we're with the free edition here, so I might end on this in like 6 minutes. I'm just gonna put a timer on real quick. All right, so we're on a 5-minute timer. If it goes before then I apologize. We should be good. So, all right. So then we have hip extension, and so what are the I guess sort of an overview then in my mind of once you can, so these people who don't have hip extension, me version 1.0, I was pretty calf dominant, pretty quad dominant, definitely on a road towards, if you look at my old form and stuff like that, it's like scary letter K position in some instances. And so a lot of it's, one of the big aspects is sort of injury prevention, getting the body more over itself and everything like that, just placing the load of those strides through the entire musculature of the body rather than just some of the quads, some of the calves, or when you're landing in that knee extended position, that gets all sort of nasty. So some advantage there, but then in terms of overall efficiency and stuff like this, I really liked Ryan Flaherty, if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, talked a lot about what he called mass specific force, what Dennis Welch calls power to ground ratio. They're the same thing basically. There's probably some name for it in powerlifting, but basically that force that you generate when you make when your concentric contraction makes contact with the ground, and the more force that you're able to generate, let's say through doing a bunch of hex bar deadlifts, but you only do the concentric phase of it, so you pop up and then drop it, pop up and then drop it. And the more force that you can get your muscles to generate in that motion, the better hip extension you'll have. And Newton's law of reaction there with opposite and equal.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. So what's your thought on, like, does obviously working hip extension in these muscles and stuff like that then helps that increase?
Obviously, you're in the gym and you're lifting weights to strengthen hip extension, but I'll take it back to the integration. You know, because for the sled walking and the tire dragging probably really comes in place because you are involving the ankle complex, you are involving the knee, the hip, and even the torso, the posture complex. Yep. You can do that, and if they're struggling to learn the proprioception, you had the drill where you had them put their arms in front, follow out their body. Another position to have them carry a weight plate or an object overhead while they're doing it. So, you know, cue them to tuck their hips in and pull forward while carrying something overhead. The longer they can make their body, the more they're going to have to stack it together to carry the load from behind them and over them. You know, just something to increase the proprioception. They're in the gym to get those muscles stronger, but their running mechanics and drills are to get them more efficient. So, you know, back to what's the intent of the movement. So if it's and you're working on your cadence, your speed, you're probably watching your heart rate monitor, you're pacing yourself. If you're working on your hip extension, you're probably filming and seeing how you move through space and time, how you react to the ground and so forth. You know, just understand the intent of what the movement you're doing, whether it's to get stronger or whether it's to get more efficient or to improve your stride or your mobility. I mean, it could be, like you said, you were calf dominant in your previous life, your first person running. That may just be from the footwear you wore, your daily activities. You may not have had the ankle mobility to land efficiently. You may have been landing heel first. So some of that's just identifying mobility restrictions too. Yeah.
Oh man, I could have a whole different talk on, like, talking about, like, mobility restrictions and stuff like that. I'm currently, like, I'm trying all the time to, like, find, like, all right, what are the essential modalities of mobility that a runner should have, or whatever it is. You know, what's essential for hamstring, what's essential for the hip, what's essential for this and that. And I have it kind of dialed down-ish, but it'd be great to sit and chat about that a little bit more. No, so that was good. We got about another minute left in the thing here, so it might cut out potentially any second. What I'd like to do in a future call, then, if you're cool, is, like, I don't know, like tomorrow I'll go on a tire drag workout or something like that. I'll try and film myself doing sort of the overhead thing and then the arm thing in front, and then just a normal tire drag, and then one when I'm super fatigued at the end. It'd be interesting to go back and sort of the both of us or whatever
review and
take a look and analyze it. Yeah, man.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Okay, cool. And then I'll do a short run, maybe up some stairs or something like that too, and I'll talk about maybe how it translates or how it doesn't, sort of in my mechanics. So that'd be awesome.
Excellent.
Cool. All right, man. Well, thank you for your time and stuff. And about 15 seconds left in the call. So
it's a pleasure.
Cool, man. I'll save it and send it over to Viata and the CHP folks. So
good.
Cool. All right, man. Have a good night.